Go lay down. Go lay down.
Hello.
Hong, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I just gotta plug something in. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Hang tight. Hey, everyone.
Hey there.
Getting tons of text messages and emails from you all. Hang in there. Let me see what's going on. And that's Nora. I wonder why you guys don't get these invites. I email them to you. Let's see who else is going to be nudging me for an invite here. Stefan's here. Casey's here. Most of you are here.
Nora is having difficulty getting in.
I just invited her. I'll do it again. There's Caitlin. Three, four, five, six, 4 more to go, 5 more to go. There's Nora. I'll give it another minute. Is anybody else communicating with you guys about having challenges getting into the class tonight? Nope. Okay, so let's get started. I want to welcome you all back. Today is the 13th of March, which means that 1 week from tonight, we have the beginning of 2 evenings of benchmark reviews. That is to say, Tuesday the 20th and Thursday the 22nd. We will do a handful of reviews on Tuesday and the remainder on Thursday. We will conduct those reviews in much the same fashion for Benchmark 2 that we did for 1. This time we will have Elizabeth Williams, Betsy Williams, as our critic on Tuesday night. Betsy is one of our senior architects at Hamilton Anderson, and she happens to be married to Peter Osler, who is Lawrence Tech's director of the landscape architecture program. And Betsy and Peter are dear, dear friends of mine, and I had the good sense of bringing Betsy in to our office after Peter accepted his position with Lawrence Tech. And she has led the effort on the Brush Park Alfred Street project. So she knows the site extremely well, perhaps better than anyone, and knows Brush Park in general because she has been leading in our office 2 projects for Brush Park. So she seems like she'd be a perfect fit. She's also taught architecture for a number of years, mostly at the University of Michigan, but she's guest lectured for me in my seminars at Lawrence Tech. This was in the BC era, and when we actually had Kodak carousel slide projectors. And she is just an amazing critic. So I think you'll enjoy her, particularly those who are scheduled for Tuesday night. On Thursday night, we have Jason Young. He is one of our new faculty members. His interests tend to be more towards the tectonics of design, and I think that the conversations at the end of the day will be balanced. Jason, as I recall, is from Berkeley and has a great deal to offer us in terms of just his pure energy, because he's brand new to the school and clearly wants to make a strong impression. And this was a critique that I had arranged. Quite honestly, the minute I met Jason, I was so impressed with him right out of the gate. So Jason will join us on Thursday night. And of course, Professor Farrow will be here for both nights. I want to also, so let me just pause and ask if there are any questions about that.
Are we reintroducing the project to the new crits?
Yep.
So we're going to kind of have the front end like we did last time.
Yep, and you'll have to do that at Benchmark 3.
As well.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Good question. Yeah, you may have critic continuity, but you also may always have a critic who's new to the conversation. So while Betsy knows the project better than any of us, except you, probably doesn't necessarily appreciate all of the requirements that, or the issues that you're tackling. Indeed, both of those professors, Betsy Williams and Jason Young, will have, they in fact have the grade sheet already. Yeah, that's who I mean. And he calls himself Jason because he probably knows I can't say his first name. But seriously, they both have the grade sheet, so they are sort of predisposed to the project to some degree, but they don't know everything about the project, and you'll have to onboard them. And I actually don't know who we're going to be having for the final critiques yet. We've talked to Michael DeCoster. I will also talk to Betsy, but often those schedules are so hard to pin down this far out in advance that I don't generally invite them just yet. So John's nudging me to let him into the class. Just a minute, let me do this. Okay, the second thing is I want to talk about the course evaluations for just a moment. They were very helpful when they had comments, when they had like typed comments. They were very helpful to me, and I definitely did encourage you to do that, and I am grateful to those of you who did. I will admit that I'm actually very disappointed that the turnout was not 100%. In fact, I'm a bit embarrassed to talk about what the actual numbers for the sort of response rate was. So to sort of make that confession at this point in the semester is probably just a little late, because it's sort of one and done. I can't really ask you or make you do that again, because that session, the survey session, was closed. But ladies and gentlemen, I need to stress to you a circumstance really that's operating at school. The private universities have enrollment that's down 15%, which means that you who are holding the cards, right, as students, like if you thought of this as like a business possibility, possibly, you're the buyer, right? You can take your money anywhere, right? And clearly, the private universities are seeing students take their money in other places, or maybe, quite honestly, they're not spending their money on higher education right now because the job market is so good. That's kind of my personal harebrained theory, that when things are really good, enrollment is actually really bad. But the point is that enrollment is very, very much a down scenario at Lawrence Tech. And many of your full-time faculty have probably already griped to you under their breath that they've got like an extra class to teach, and that they're all teaching graduate classes, and that maybe you're aware that there's only 6 adjunct faculty of the 95 that they have on the hook that are actually teaching this semester and last semester. Only 6. And I happen to be one of them, which means that someone in the room down by the dean's office had to make a decision. Now, I don't know if there were any adults in the room when they made the decision to have me teach this class, but clearly they're making hard choices about who's going to teach and who's not going to teach. So the feedback that you give is not only useful for me, but it's useful for the possible role of 2 things. One, maintaining an adjunct in some of these studios, for one thing, and for another, the possibility that even an online studio exists at all. So it's really, really important for you to take time when this course evaluation scenario pops up again near the end of the semester. I really need you all to spend some time to give that feedback and participate. And so I will, I'm sure, send you the announcement when they're coming and that they've been released. But I'm actually really hoping that we get a much more encouraging response from everyone this time around, because the next one really does matter. It is the one I think that they look hard at, the sort of roster of faculty for the coming year. That's the first thing that I want to say about the course evaluations. The second was that since there weren't that many people that participated in them, that's my pouty face, there were some things that were stated that were very interesting. One statement said, good grief, we had a desk crit with you on a Thursday, and you scheduled us for Tuesday for our benchmark, and that was kind of like that's just not fair. So I'm not exactly sure what that. I mean, I think I know what that means, but really, you guys, when the benchmarks start, right? So when they start on Tuesday, your work is supposed to be done on Tuesday, right? Even if you're presenting on Thursday, your work is supposed to be uploaded on Tuesday. So everyone, in all fairness to you guys, everyone has the same amount of time. So that observation about being unfair about the relationship of of the desk crit to the final the benchmark review is not very well grounded, in my opinion. I think it's something that you need to work through in your own way, but to make sure that your work is done at the beginning of the review session. But to mitigate that confrontation, or to make that problem sort of go away, I released the schedule for the benchmark 2 reviews in advance of the sign-up list for this particular week. So it's really beholden to you, right, in terms of when you sign up for your desk crit this week, and you can pick that, relational to when you present for benchmark 2 next week. So and I'll try to do that again in a month. Let's look at. So that's the second thing I wanted to say about the reviews. The next thing I want to talk about is the next month, right? So we will have reviews on the 20th and the 22nd, and then we will have a review session in our group sort of format on Tuesday the 27th, and then we will have literally 4 weeks of class sessions remaining in the and that will comprise the month of April. If we look at the wedding date, right? If we look at Tuesday the 24th and the 26th, that's really the evenings that the college asks us to have our reviews. So that means there's only 3 weeks in April that we're working, and we will have pencils down on Sunday, April 22nd. So we will have 3 weeks of class sessions in April after benchmark 2. But in the week of Monday the 16th through Sunday the 22nd, that's what we call crunch week, right? If I've been drinking beer, I might call it hell week. So for those of us like me that talk like a longshoreman, hell week is really the week of the 16th through the 22nd. That's the week where I presume, and I have always presumed, that I'm the very last person that you want to see or get feedback from. So I actually do not schedule classes or hold classes that week. Now, because that's the week that you all are crunching or suffering, right? Whatever way you want to take it. But during the week of the 16th through the 22nd, which is pencils down, while I do not hold classes, I can and have always been available to hold a one-off session. So if you do want to talk with me or with Professor Farrow during that week, it's probably advisable to let us know, in advance, not at 4:30 in the afternoon on Thursday the 19th, but sometime over the previous weekend, because in as much as you schedule your time for Hell Week, Crunch Week, so do I. Like that might be one of the nights that I actually get to have dinner. So that's kind of the thing that I'd like to put on your radar. So we will really only have the weeks of the 2nd and the 9th together in class sessions for new content, for desk crits after Benchmark 2. We will also be having Professor Dustin Atschul, coming in for an energy modeling lecture in April. So we still have a lot more content to deliver, and you still have more time to do the work. But the punchline here is that while it may still not even be, the Ides of March yet, the fact is that the calendar is going to go very, very quickly from here on in. So you need to fasten your seatbelt and get ready for that. And I hope, honestly, that the break was restful and productive. I'm anxious to see how productive the break was for each of you as we begin to talk this week. I see that Professor Farrow is here. Dan, do you want to add anything about the look ahead in April? Maybe from the calendar perspective or the rhythm of the class relative to maybe your lab. I'm just trying to contextualize the last sort of 2 benchmarks that we have coming up.
Sure. So at this point, I would say normally in this class, we've always tried to say from the standpoint of studio work to try to get yourself to the point by week 10 or 9 that you're basically not making major changes after that point. That means the basic building envelope is set. The majority of your rooms are established. Your structure is established. And so if you're making changes, you would consider them to be fairly minor. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that would leave time for really talking about the development of elements that basically require you to have conditions fixed in the building. So solidifying structure, HVAC, enclosure details, for example, can't really be done if things are constantly being changed. So that's one of our goals. I did send you the next lab module. I can go over that tonight whenever we have time as well. I'll just give you some of my perspectives about the last lab module. Mark, do we have time to do that now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So there is a range. I would say grades range from sort of like A through D, and places in between for the class assignment overall. So just to kind of run through some of them. In terms of the bioclimatic conditions, results were somewhat mixed. We do have some very high levels of achievement, people meeting the criteria or people exceeding the criteria, particularly those that actually said, well, I'm going to do a Insight 360 model study of comparative shapes and forms and find out which one will turn out with the least energy consumption. And that was all very well thought through and added to the work profile for that aspect of the module. Others basically still are having some problems in some areas. For example, the issue of calculating surface area to volume ratio still seems to be not understood by a few teams. I thought we had made it clear. We talked about it a few times already. What you basically have to do is take the largest, the overall dimensions of the project, that's height, width, and length, divide it by a number such that none of those 3 numbers is going to exceed 9. And once you do that, then you can go ahead and recalculate your surface areas and your volume and arrive at a value that would be close to the value that you see in the textbook. When you calculate the surface area, remember you do calculate the roof, all exterior walls, and you do calculate the first floor footprint in contact with the ground. That number should be calculated as the ratio. You would probably find your ratios for the most part are going to be somewhat similar to the textbook recommendation based on those that I've seen thus far. And then if you're varying from that, indicate what percentage your variation would be. So You know, if you're if the textbook says 1.5 and you're 2.0, your variance is 0.5 divided by 1.5. So that's your number, roughly 30% or 33% variance. The same would be said for your orientation. A number of cases, I think people were underestimating the degree at which the site has already been shifted off the north-south, east-west axis, and we're probably underestimating the rotation of their project from the ideal 18 degrees off of east-west. So that needs to be looked at again. I'm trying to think of other issues there. Those were sort of the predominant ones that I noticed in that portion of the assignment. In terms of the building code, some were well done, others still have some gaps in there. So basically, in terms of the gaps that need to be filled, you need to be able to to describe the occupancy condition on the various floors. Keep in mind that when you have what appears to be a mixed occupancy, it may not be.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, on that first floor ground plane, you know, I realize you probably have what you would categorize as retail and business, correct? But if you have less, if 10% or less of the square footage on that space is of one particular type of use, that's just considered an accessory use. It's not truly a mixed use situation. Most people do recognize that the lower level podium is concrete, and by definition, those sorts of buildings, those sorts of structures will need at least a 1 hour rating enclosure, and certainly with concrete, you'll have that without a problem. Note that you also have to define what are called area separations. That means it's a condition where you physically separate one part of the building from another, and you usually do that when there's an occupancy shift. So most people did not define that. So for the most part, your occupancy shifts would probably be the first floor. That would be the structure above the parking, and that would be an 3 hour rated occupancy or area separation between the business, retail, and the residential up above. That's probably what most of you are going to have, but you need to define that as such. Some of you wondered about other uses in the space. So you know, mechanical rooms, restrooms, storage rooms, electrical rooms. Those are not separate uses. Those are basically an incidental use. Those are uses that occur in every building. So those are just sort of, they're not really another type of use category that you have to be concerned about. In terms of, again, the building structural code requirements, so we need to have to make sure that you check your maximum height of your building and your maximum square footage per floor and the total square footage against the maximum requirements for that construction type that you have. Once you put in an area separation, let's say from the below grade parking to the upper level, you can begin to count your total square footage from that point forward. Does that make sense? And also, of course, when you're dealing with stories above grade, you would start at grade. So, of course, the parking is not going to be counted in terms of total building height. Also, you'd want to know what the fire ratings are of the exterior walls and the interior walls that are associated with egress. And keep in mind that you do have I think almost everyone has sprinklering. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I have a quick question. Maybe Professor Farlow knows this, but I was just looking at some of the updates to the IBC code today, and I may be mistaken, but I think if you do have a building that is sprinklered, that for residential occupancies, is it true that you do not have to have a door to the egress stairs? That it can be just simply open from the corridor?
No, we have rated doors and rated hardware for those exit stairs.
All right, thank you. So you need to understand those conditions of fire ratings, and also the fire ratings of the assembly of the outer wall. That will be more of a point of discussion later. In terms of then you have to check that against the code requirement. So many of you told me how tall your building was in height, but you didn't look back at the code and say, okay, how tall can it be based on that construction type and occupancy? So I need to have that kind of comparison done. In the case of the HVAC, I would say that was probably what I expected to be. Most of you are still in progress with that. Probably the common condition that I encountered was not necessarily showing me how the common areas are going to be served with HVAC. Most of you have addressed the units for the most part, and you've determined the type of conditioning for the units, but not the common areas. So the hallway, the gym, all those first floor spaces on the lower level, and also the spaces that occur on common spaces that occur on every occupant residential floor as well. And that's really probably part of the base building HVAC component. It's something that serves the entire building, so it's more of a central system at that point. So that would be what was needed. I think most of you seem to pick package units, and that's fine. Most of the locations were okay, except there was one team. The package unit was on the inside of the space and not in contact with an outside wall. And that's where there's going to have to be some sort of consideration for how fresh air comes in and how you're linked to the AC side of the system, which has your condenser unit, and where the fresh air is coming from. So if you had, I think there was one team that had the so-called unit component inside the unit, but not near an exterior wall. There would be questions about where the air has to be and how air is introduced and exhausted, and also what's the connection to the refrigeration condenser unit. And in that case, where the person had the interior HVAC unit, know that you do have to have an exterior condenser for the AC. And that's usually sitting, often that's going to be sitting on, for example, like sorry, I can't think of the word I'm looking for here, a deck or what do they call those things when you walk out on a balcony, sitting on a balcony. And if they're not on a balcony, they're going to have to be on a wall, inside of a wall that has a direct connection to the outside for air, because those sort of condenser units have to be vented and have to have free air movement around them. So that was sort of and also I think the HVAC units were, the whole system needs to be described. That means, where would you have the DOAS? Where would you have the energy recovery ventilator? Where would you have the, in some cases you had to have cooling towers, for example, or boiler units. Where are they located in the building in some form as well? So in terms of the building envelope, most people basically had a list of some of the materials they're thinking about. That's fine. I think we maybe had a couple of teams that actually started doing investigations of wall sections, and that was certainly a good effort to sort of move that forward as we're looking on to the future. So those are some of my observations from the last module.
Great. And then you all have the sort of assignment from the studio component for the next benchmark, and it and the grade sheet, so you know what we're looking for, you know how important that criteria is relational to the other components, the other criteria. The criteria is the same. Some of the language has increased its expectation, so read carefully the fine print, if you will, within the criteria, and please notice that the percentages have shifted a little bit to, again, preference things like building enclosure, structural systems, and HVAC, just for an example. But this is the benchmark. Next week's benchmark is the benchmark that not only aligns with that 9-week, 10-week sort of moment in the semester where everything, for the most part, has to be baked, but the grading and the assessment of the work up to this point certainly aligns with that as well. I do have some slides to go over. I felt like it was good for you to, so I'm going to screen share if I can get a thumbs up that you see this. Good. So I will go right into that. So I want to show you a number of sort of methods of approaching the explanation of our architectural ideas, ideas that are graphical, ideas that are difficult to explain, and the conventions that we as architects use, And I've broken them into kind of these categories: conceptual thinking and research, case studies or precedents, program, conceptual design strategies, drawings, media, and renderings. And I want to go through these to open up the sort of open up your eyes, but also to ground. Are you screen sharing a file? So you're not seeing the screen share?
I'm not. Oh, never mind. I see it now.
Okay.
I see it.
Okay. So I thought I saw a thumbs up earlier. I apologize. So so the other thing that's going to ground it is that this is all student work, right? So this is all stuff that your classmates did, or the classmates before you. So I want you to look at things like figure ground, right? A first year issue, but like text on the sheet. Look at the size of the text. Look at the line weight. Look at the font. Look at the colors. Look how a plate can be very spare in its graphical approach, almost Swiss or German in its graphic design sort of aesthetic, but very clear in its and very rich in its sort of explanation. I think this is an interesting plate because it talks about not architecture as a response to a problem, but maybe architecture as a response to a question, like, what am I trying to prove? What's the sense of urgency here? So this is something that maybe it applies to you now, maybe it will apply to you later. But the idea here is that the questions you raise can also give rise to architectural outcomes. This happens to be a historical timeline that shows events throughout the course of the history of Windsor and Detroit over dozens of years. For example, 1950 is sort of right here in the timeline. Or this project, this plate that blends a series of things like climate and weather to soils condition, to a site section, to a site plan, all with very simple, colorful, graphical sort of nomenclature or language in a very sort of pleasant and kind of happy, dare I say, childlike simplicity, right? This is kind of a diagram that talks about the sort of structural path or the critical path that the process of design took them in, and they took a few sort of moments to sort of document that path in a graphical way, and I thought that was a fairly interesting approach. This one is sort of the same thing, talking a little bit about the role of the architect in a process, working with community groups and stakeholders, and the feedback that you get within that critical process, talking about where these conversations and this feedback might have occurred relative to a place. This is a plate that talks a little bit about sort of who the client is and what that client's attitude is, and what they might be, what they might look like, and what they might feel like, and what they might like say is important to them. So quoting them and giving them some like testimonial space in the project was something that this individual did. I've always loved this one. This was from a few years ago when we were dealing with missing middle housing. This is talking a little bit about the cycle of poverty that the so-called millennial group finds themselves in, starting, entering the elliptical highway with a high school degree, pursuing a higher education, graduating with a large amount of debt, and then needing to stay in the basement of their parents' house because the housing market has suffered and they can't afford a mortgage, and you know, sort of like this sort of process is kind of depressing at the same time as it is informative. This analysis is looking at like existing materials of a site, color coding them and describing them in texture, and describing them in some ways like in quantity. Figure ground drawings showing a community or a place or a neighborhood over the changes of time. So 1897 at the top, 1921, and then 1951, and then color coding the figure ground in such a way that those shapes relate to use or occupancy. And it's a beautiful palette, and it's a beautiful but sad drawing at the same time. Or a figure ground showing the site as it relates to property lines and property ownership, and talking about who owns the land and what it's used for in a very simple, straightforward palette. I love the graphical approach on this. It takes the rotated angle of Woodward, which you share in your project, and reorients it so north is still true. But then it overlays the area of focus with this square, so that within the square, there's a great deal of detail, but at the same time, the figure ground is still the most important thing. And that figure ground stuff, the buildings and the spaces between them, are also color coded. And in this case, some of the buildings are called out as street addresses, for example. Case studies. So I love this one because it takes a look at a whole bunch of places like Volterra, Italy, Bath, England, Bruges, Belgium, Midland, Grand Rapids, and West Bloomfield, Michigan, to name a few communities. And shows us what they look like all at the same scale, so that we can understand those communities relative to one another and understand them by sort of comparison. So this is an interesting approach. Another case study analysis was looking at high rises and talking a little bit about, you know, the high rise as a tower on a podium, which was specific to this particular studio, talking about it throughout history. So the PSFS building in Philadelphia, or the Daily News building, or Lever House by Gordon Bunshaft in New York. All of these buildings are heavyweights, right, in the conversation of this typology, and it helped the student create what they called the Toronto stack. So the case study gave credibility to their solution. The case study is also a way to compare several things throughout history, throughout architecture, for one kind of project. So, you know, in the upper left, you're looking at people like Lebbeus Woods. You're looking at Paul Rudolph and the Lomex, which is the Lower Manhattan Expressway. You're looking at Super Studio and the Continuous City. You know, on and on, including the Japanese Metabolist at the very bottom. So this was a housing studio, and this individual took a crash course in history to understand the relationship of what she or he was studying and how that might inform, right, their own work. And I also really appreciate the graphical punch and vividness of this research. So the colors are profound. The images are stock images, and the analysis is sort of off to the side, and the analysis is his own words. This is a case study of just 3 different architects doing work. I actually don't know the piece on the right. I learned it as I was taking the studio with this individual, but the plates in the middle are Elemental, who won the Pritzker Prize a couple of years ago, showing a housing approach in Chile, and then a home for unwed mothers in Europe by Aldo van Eyck, and how these case studies informed this student's own work, which is in the column of blue and gray off to the right. We talk a little bit about case studies through looking at small work that might not be noticed or maybe not evident in the mass media. So we looked at the work of the Office of Jonathan Tate on the left. We looked at the Yale student housing. The students at Yale in the grad program actually build houses for the underserved in the New Haven community. And so this middle column of image and content is one of their homes. And then talking about how that might play out on their site in North End, for example. Or looking at Detroit, just looking at Detroit and Detroit architecture and how Detroitness might influence their work, and documenting sort of the essence of historic and Detroit modernism. Or sometimes it's not in Detroit at all. It's housing in Europe and understanding, what we can learn from our friends across the pond. Talking about program, talking about like the agenda for a building in terms of its use and its square footage, and how you sort of document that, and how those uses and those percentages relative to the distribution of that program throughout the building can be graphically measured and quantifiable. Again, the palette here is pretty restrained, but it's fairly consistent. And sometimes that program can be rendered or described in 3 dimensions. And sometimes it can be described in color, like this bar graph off to the left. And each of those colors indicate a relational sort of value relative to the overall. So the program and area distribution chart on the left relates to the architecture, right, on the right. And the palette here is off the chain. It's really, really beautiful stuff. Conceptual design strategies. How is it that architects actually illustrate the things that they're thinking? How, a lot of us maybe kind of like sit down at their computer and somehow start drawing on their computer. But I think if you look at what architects have done before, they have other tools to sort of create the sort of juices, right, to create the possibility of making creative outcomes that are maybe a little bit different than simply moving right into Revit to start designing. So taking photographs and maybe collaging them so that we understand the most important aspects of a piece of architecture relative to their equivalent neighbor in this sort of collage at the bottom of the sheet. Or looking at the site as a section and considering how program might be discharged on the ground plane, for example, relative to streets. Looking at variations on a site and how one can understand the sort of overall order. Or looking at iterations, right? Iterations are variations on a theme, and it's important that you take a moment to document those iterations to show us the sort of the possibilities, the sort of infinite possibilities. And understanding how a development might be seen as a stacked thing, like a club sandwich, as you see in the upper right drawing, and how that development can be seen as a series of energy lines that sort of make their way through and connect with the architecture itself. Looking at iterations by showing how a concept, or in this case, the idea of the Toronto stack, can be modified or changed, and showing how that can happen in a very simple diagrammatic way. Here, looking at how a mass, someone's knocking at the door, how a mass can actually be described and how it can go through a series of subtractive moves, right? So you're seeing you're seeing that happen in this diagram, and you'll see that in another moment. This kind of brings a tear to my eye. This is hand-drawn drawings, right, on onion skin, showing thinking through the end of their pencil, right? This is a beautiful drawing just showing the city of Cincinnati, showing major sort of circulation routes and connection routes throughout the city relative to the river. Here is a site plan that is actually kind of printed with acetone onto a sheet of MDF board, which is the very desk that I'm sitting at, which then has a series of other objects like the legend at the bottom and line work with strings to show connections. A beautiful drawing. A site in Anchorage, Alaska, showing the downtown core and the subject site. More traditional drawings, sections and plans and elevations. Notice how the elevations and the plans are at the same scale. That's good. But in this case, the sections are twice the scale because they're showing human habitation and they're showing spatial definition within a building enclosure. And notice how the buildings always sit on a ground line. Notice how sections are always given horizontal target lines and vertical dimensions. Notice how plans show section cuts. So these are the rules of the game, and this student, plays those rules out. This is a beautiful floor plan. It's actually burnished into a sheet of cardstock and then rendered as a boundary. And then all of the walls of this model are actually three-dimensional pieces of like balsa wood and basswood. So the walls of this proposal have vertical height and cast their own shadow. It's a beautiful floor plan. And these are actually very small. These are the size of your sort of high school senior picture, right? This plate is more congested. It shows sections and elevations relational to one another, showing everything sitting on the ground or in the ground. Here's a elevation and a section operating at the same time. And notice how the background helps to contextualize the architecture. It gives it a ground on which the section can sit, right? So again, the expectation is that you're producing this semester some of the most beautiful, thorough, comprehensive work in your portfolio because, we expect it from everyone else, right, that came before you. This is a simple Revit model that is a cutaway section as well as a three-dimensional axonometric of their housing proposal in North End. This is a project in Cleveland that shows new buildings and new open space within a sort of concept of urban joinery. And so this is a SketchUp model that discharges shade and shadow on it. Another section that's relational to the plan. So the sky in this section drawing is actually the site plan, which is again a beautiful There we are. We lost you. I want to make sure we get the screen back. Okay. So the section here begins to show, again, the site plan beyond, and it's a beautiful drawing, suitable, right, for framing. Can everyone see the section drawing still? Thumbs up? Nope. I've got it on screen share still.
Click on the screen share icon on Mark's image.
Is that better?
I
Yes?
got it. It's
Yes?
working for me.
Okay. Sometimes these drawings are more conceptual, like this one. Sometimes they're more traditional, like this one. And what's interesting here is that this section drawing through a small intervention is also an elevation drawing. This is actually several years old now. You know, this is kind of intriguing. This is a drawing that reminds people my age of the old blueprints where everything was printed white on a blue background. And this Revit drawing was created in much the same way to evoke that sort of historic document. The media, you know, these are hand drawn, right? Colored with marker and pencil, and then taken into Photoshop to stitch them together. This was magic marker and colored pencil, a quick sketch that just shows the essence of what Joseph was trying to get at in his project. This was the cover of Cody's book. So a site plan and a figure ground drawing became the cover of the thesis, as is the case with Rami's drawing for Cleveland. A collage drawing where a place in Detroit has three sort of elevations to contextualize the site. So there's an elevation of photography here at the left, below shown upside down, and at the top also shown upside down because the drawing is meant to be held in your hand and rotated to be viewed in somewhat of an intimate way. This is both printed on board and then layered over or woven. So the site plan is actually a physical three-dimensional model. This is downtown Cleveland. This is taking the site and printing the aerial site plan on it and taking it through a series of folds to show what Caitlin was interested in exploring. This was a student that took beeswax and took it through a process of some sort of disturbance to create a new three-dimensional iteration. Here's the Cleveland project, right? Simple materials like just a poster that they found in a garbage can and slice it, plaster of Paris and MDF board, metal, be careful not to cut yourself, cardboard, literally box cardboard from your Zappos shoes order, and taken through a series of disturbances. This is foam core. These are terrific ways to delineate things. Plywood from your wood shop, right? Full size. This is Irena's project. This is a full-size model. Many of you will be doing work that makes it very difficult for us to sort of select your work for fine grain. So this is a fine grain submittal. This is after the studio is over, and if you're chosen, if you're nominated for that, you'll have to go through another iteration and kind of pull your work together into one board. And so this is one of those efforts where the whole project had to be reduced to one physical board. And then the renderings. So this is sort of like a blend of the Old Testament and the New Testament, looking at old school Revit renderings, old school SketchUp drawings, and then maybe some more recent things, right? These are all seniors and graduate students. This guy learned Lumion in 1 week. These two are from a young lady. Actually, she's not that young, but she's actually a practicing architect in Columbus, and she learned Revit in one semester and took Revit into rendering. And these were her very first renderings ever in Revit. This is actually a rendering in Revit taken through Photoshop. This is the Lumion guy. Another old guy that learned a trick. Old dog learns new tricks. This is the Toronto Stack project. I appreciate this one because it's partially a perspective, but it's also showing kind of the cost of materials. The site section. And showing your building in moments of the year or moments in time. Like this one is a moment where the development was taken as a, kind of like a farmer's market. This one's taken, for instance, in the summer. This one's taken as a building is developing over time. This one's taken at a summer concert scene, but it doesn't have to be, you know, the beautiful, you know, North American weather. It can be wintertime or it can be fall, right? Here's some fall shots. Night shots are particularly, you know, that moment, the twilight, the gloaming hour is a particularly compelling time of day to, you know, show your work. So, yeah, I wanted to go, actually, I should show you this. I should linger on this for a second. I wanted to show you these so that you appreciated, that you appreciated everything in the context of, you know, what you're about to do. So you're all going to be doing, you all have until next week to pull your projects together in such a fashion that they have, if you will, colossal comprehensiveness, right? This benchmark review has higher stakes on your grade because it's a more important benchmark. It's kind of a dress rehearsal for benchmark 3. We don't expect everything to be done, but we certainly expect that you're dealing and confronting with lots of issues that are not only sort of design-based, but technically based. I wanted to end with this one slide. I don't know if you all know this, but in '85, Martin Schwartz and I, that's Martin on the left there, and yours truly on the right. I still wear bow ties. We all taught together back at Mississippi State, and I shared with Martin this photograph. I don't think he'd seen it in quite some time. So that's my sort of parting shot for us on that one. So I wanted to make sure that you saw these renderings so that you saw what kind of you're up against, that that your classmates before you, in some cases, those are like, you know, 10 years old, 8 years old. But in many cases, this is work that is exemplary. And I'm looking forward to adding, you know, your work to the next version, the next edition of this talk, and definitely start thinking hard about those shots, and I'd be interested to go over those viewpoints with you, those perspective points with you as you make your way into the coming week. So we're more or less on time. I'm ready to start in about 5 minutes the individual sessions. Dan, you're welcome to stick around for the 3 groups that we're going to see tonight, or you can come back after we're done, whatever suits you.
Okay, I'll see what I can squeeze in here.
Cool. I'll be back in 5 if there's no questions on what you saw. And who are we going to see first? Cody. Okay.
Richard.
Cody and Richard. Okay, give me 5 minutes. I'll be right back. Thanks. I also wanted to mention that I will be on campus Friday afternoon for the Lawrence Tech Career Fair with Hannah from our office, and a graduate from 2 years ago. And so if you're there, stop by to see me. I'd be happy to say hi. And if you're interviewing, I want to wish, or if you're speed dating, whatever we call that, because those aren't really interviews, but if you're there, I wish you good luck. I hope that it goes well for you. I don't know how many firms Lawrence Tech has brought in for this career fair, but I'm sure the sort of architecture gallery exhibition hall will be pretty full, and I'm looking forward to being there. I'll be at Michigan on Thursday, and then we're actually going to Morgan State in Baltimore next month, and we've already been to UDM and to Howard University so far. So it's been a crazy career fair season with just 3 more to go. We're halfway through it, and we'll be able to sort of check 2 more off the list this week. And I know IPAL is interviewing. If you're not in IPAL, or if you have been thinking about it, I think you may be a little late for this year, but IPAL is a fairly interesting alternative curriculum that sort of asks local firms to host you as a sponsor for your sort of NCARB evolution. I know Trevor is an IPAL curriculum student, and we have Austin in our office, who's currently someone we're hosting. So that's happening, I think, as we speak as well. So okay, so Richard and Cody, you guys want to screen share? Who wants to go first?
Sure. Dan, are you there?
He might have just stepped away.
Because I do have some like structure questions. I don't know.
Sure.
I'm here.
Okay. So I guess basically I've been playing with the structure layout and everything. And we've kind of come to a conclusion of having the garage up to the main level as a concrete podium, and then above that having like the can't talk, the heavy timber. So basically, so like around here is the rammed earth, and then I was thinking of spanning this direction. With
You want to screen share, Richard?
Oh, oopsies. That might help. Can you see?
Almost. Yep. Now we can.
Okay, so basically the rammed earth is along here. And then so spanning this way would be heavy timber beams. And then this way would be trusses, just because they'd have to be so deep. If we did beams, we wouldn't be able to run HVAC and plumbing and all that stuff through it. So we could.
What are the beams connected to?
Say that again?
What are your beams connected to?
There's columns on the grid lines.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when they get to the outside wall, it's still a column?
So I was looking at the details for the rammed earth. Basically they just they just anchor them into the wall. And then the outside walls, this side and this side, would have the columns in them.
Is there any sort of bearing plate that they require, like a steel shoulder or plate that then is anchored into the rammed earth that receives the beam?
I thought about that, Richard, but you go ahead. Go ahead.
What? Oh. So hold on, let me show you the details that they have. They only have this one, which is only a single floor. So I'm gonna contact them to see what they do for multiple floors. But as you can see, they kind of just anchor it into the wall. Because the walls are actually, with the sidewall, they're reinforced with steel. So they have rebar running through them. Let me see. Not this one.
So most of the time for load-bearing walls, though, you have fairly closely spaced joists or
Right.
purlins. And when you have
Right.
a column, I mean, when you have a beam with a large spacing on it, you're putting you're putting a large load on that point of the wall. So it might be a safer alternative to consider that to be like a pilaster.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, where there's a column in a sense built into the wall at that point, or a
Right.
thickened wall. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I would probably suggest that based on what I see.
Okay. That
The
makes
idea
sense.
of using a steel plate to bear some load is
Sure.
not a bad idea.
And the reason I bring that idea up, Richard, is because when I recall what you guys showed for sills and headers at window openings that were prepared or cut through these rammed earth walls, they had a similar like spanner condition, right? When they had an opening, they treated it with a different material so that water didn't get into that opening from below at the sill, and
Right.
the rammed earth had something to sit on and translate the loads out to the jams so that it could return to its more vertical direction after the opening.
Right. And then they did say that the foundation kind of acts as like the what's it called, like the bearing plate to hold the wall all together. So the rebar just like goes all the way down. to just kind of hold the wall in together, just like the lintels and everything do.
Do you guys have a section through this new proposed structural?
We have a preliminary one.
Let's see it.
Not really.
or just open it up, and we can talk through it. I just want to make sure I understand, because when I looked at the framing plan, Richard, it looked like those trusses that comprise the second floor, or is it the second floor that you took it at? That those were fairly close together?
Yeah, I have them at 16 inches right now, before I do like the calculations and everything, just for prelim.
Are those like a pre-engineered wood truss or steel trusses?
They'd be the wood truss. I looked in the book, the Studio Companion book, and I got the sizing and stuff out of there.
Is this a CLT system?
No.
It's not cross-laminated timber?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't copied it up to the other floors yet, but.
So the rammed earth goes up past residential too?
This is just showing, this one right here is just the timber column.
Gotcha.
I haven't done the, let me see, the rammed earth yet.
It's not where the rammed earth is, I think.
No, that column was taken, the
It's on the
section
other
was
side.
right here.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And then Dan, for the main floor, for the concrete slab, do you think it'd be better to do a two-way or a waffle slab on that?
What sort of span conditions do you have?
The biggest span is here with the 33 feet.
At 33 feet, you can have a beam and slab system in concrete. But
Okay.
you're kind of pushing the limit of span length. I mean, without going to high strength concrete or post tensioning and pre tensioning, you know, you can top out at about 35, 36 feet.
Right. Yeah.
Waffle slabs are more expensive because of all the coffering,
Right.
and they're not. I'm not sure I've seen them for parking because of that cost expense.
Okay. Well, this would be like above the parking, so it would just be for the main floor.
Again, I would say unless you're hitting that 45-foot span limit length, I would probably not use it. I think the cost will go up,
Okay.
and I'm not sure you're going to gain that much from it. I mean, at 33 feet, you can span it with a two-way or one-way slab with beams.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
To answer your question, should it be two-way or one-way? If it's a rectangular bay where there's clearly a long dimension and a short dimension, probably one day. But if your bays are squarish in profile,
Right.
then I would say two-way.
Their majority are rectangular. There's like a few that are like really short, like this one right here. It's short and long, but then other ones are like this that are square.
Again, if they're predominantly square, then I would say use a two-way. If they're more rectangular, where the difference between one side and the other side is roughly 1 to 1.5, then I would say use a one-way.
Okay. Okay. Cody, did you want to talk about the HVAC?
Yes. Do you mind if I screen share? This,
Yeah.
the stacked water source heat pumps.
Mm-hmm.
So we are going to move forward for the heating and cooling of our building. As you can see with this diagram right here, that is a system that as the name implies, it is a vertical system, and we would be able to move it through all our rooms in the same location, and is one of one of the more efficient systems that we could employ within the building. And I don't have anything on Revit yet, but kind of just if you have anything to say about a system like this, I
think this is consistent with one of the options we gave you. So
Right.
Okay.
I think you just have to make sure it looks like that they are placed on an outside wall, or is
Right.
that the case?
Yes, questions I was going to ask is, do these things draw inside on from the location on each floor, or a source where we can determine where it draws in the fresh air at?
As I said earlier, if you put them inboard away from the exterior wall, you typically do have to have a line of connection with a duct that pulls in air from the outside. Somewhere the system has to pull in fresh air, right, and has to expel exhaust air. Frequently, these systems tend to be along an outer wall because then there's no ductwork chase needed. You just simply have a vent or a screen, on the outside wall adjacent to the unit.
That's my experience with that. That's how we solve that issue.
Also, make sure you understand whether the unit needs an outside condenser or not. If it needs an outside condenser, then that's either in the unit on an outside wall, or you'd expect that it may be sitting on a balcony.
Okay.
Again, remember, there has to be something for the rest of the common spaces in the building. So this might be a unit solution, but we've got to get conditioned air to the hallways, the community room, the laundry, right?
Yep.
Okay. I mean, I would use the same type of system, but it's just going to have a different, it's just going to have to serve those other areas differently.
Right. This would give us ideas as to allowing some, say, the rooms that are on the Ramdra side versus putting these units on an exterior wall on the non-Ramdra side, so we have minor penetrations in that wall system. So, yes, that's all I have really as far as HVAC for this evening.
So I guess what I would mention is that at the beginning of the semester, I left you all in one of the folders in the research module a big PDF file that talks. It's produced. It's published by SES, Strategic Energy Solutions. They're an outfit, a consulting engineer that our office uses, that many local offices uses. Steve DeBaradine, who's one of the principals there, is really, really interested in geothermal, for instance. So there's material in that book in that PDF on that. But this guide, this document that I shared with everyone, is kind of the mixed-use buildings for dummies as it relates to mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. So I would encourage all of you, as you're moving into this benchmark, which puts high value on HVAC, for example, I would make sure that you really peruse that guide. You will find it's very straightforward, it's very helpful, and it's very comprehensive.
Yeah. We'll make sure we take a close look at that.
And then,
I mean, I would add the same thing. I know that in the systems I gave you, I had links to different types of
right, with lots of sources that you could drill into.
You really need to not proceed until you've sat down and digested that material to a degree, because that's going to set the direction and probably answer most of your questions. You really have to take time to do that before you can really start working on the planning, I think.
Okay.
Cool. Anything else, you guys?
No, we don't have anything else to discuss tonight.
Great. Okay, good. Thanks. And who's next?
I think that's me and Alec.
Yep.
Yep. Go ahead.
All right. I can screen share first, Alec, if that works for you. I'm just gonna. let's see. There it is. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so Alec, feel free to jump in here because this was a team effort on the unit planning, but we started with the refinement of our the residential floors and trying to work out how those specific units fit into the two wings of the L, and then also trying to get rid of some of the just arbitrary iterations of what we had at 13 bedrooms before. So we have it down to 7, and then 1 to 2 bedrooms in terms of square footage. So then this would be level 2. And then
so they're color coded based on the unit square footage and orientation.
Right.
So that denotes each of the 7 different sizes and shapes of units that we have.
Yep, and then going up to 4 here, and then 5. So then this is still kind of a work in progress, but we have that palette that we've referenced in earlier presentations that is going to correlate to this, and then I guess just kind of be laced into a comprehensive presentation. So it'll be an easily recognizable reference to.
So can you guys zoom in on the 1 bedroom near column W3, the purple one? I see. I see.
What is the space you're entering in when you go into unit 507?
This space here?
Yes.
That'd be the kitchen / living area.
Would exist in that immediately to your left, and then the living room would exist on the exterior wall.
Okay.
And then the sleeping room is where the 386 is. The bathroom is behind the closet.
Yep.
I understand. So that's a 507? Or no,
this is room 507.
Room 507.
Yeah, 386.
Under 400 square feet.
Yeah.
No, the entire room is larger. The square footage is changed once I put in the walls. I believe it's actually closer to 600.
Yeah, 600
some square feet.
I have a question on the lower right corner, which is the exercise room.
Yes.
I guess a question for Professor Farlow is that the kind of space that you would give away to a unit, or would you give it to a common area?
So, we've talked, so I saw that and I raised my brow as well. And I anticipated that we would be talking about this. If I had any sort of influence on this conversation, either working with these guys in the office, or if I was working for the owner group as, their in-house architect, I might have to say that I'll have to be really persuaded to give up that prime real estate for an exercise room on such like a high profile condition. Bear in mind that east facade is looking at City Modern Detroit. It's looking towards Eastern Market, and the south facade, while it only has 1 window in it currently, it could have more, and it could be looking, towards Ford Field. And
the only thing is that south facade is looking right at that
at the other building. Yeah, I understand that.
That's
and
why
so I think that's how you have to sort of contextualize your explanation. I think that's the case you have to make.
Yeah, that was my reasoning, was to give that south wall so the units across the way in that building aren't staring into the units
Yep.
In our building, and vice versa. We would give that south wall to the public spaces, the egress spaces, and
So, Alec, what happens on like 416 or 316?
they're the units are varied between an exercise room and a laundry room.
I see.
Between floors, so it goes every other floor is.
Gotcha. So every other floor there's a laundry, and every other floor there's a exercise room.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a vertical public amenities.
The opportunity might be for you to treat that in terms of fenestration differently.
Mm-hmm.
The other opportunity is to change the mass, let it step back a little bit so it reads differently, so
Okay.
that it can be kind of a material differentiation, given the common area role that tip, if you will, is playing in the architecture, to emphasize its difference.
Can I ask what happens to the left of Unit 504?
5. Oh.
Keep going down and left.
The
Right
two
here is
bedroom. What happens there?
That's an outdoor terrace with access to views of downtown.
Is that only unique to this floor?
This floor just below it on the 4th floor, there's an indoor space with a smaller terrace as well.
Can I ask why you didn't consider moving the 2-bedroom to the left and put that open space contiguous to the lobby and the elevator?
The reason why I put the community terrace to that far corner is because it has the best visual access to the RenCen and downtown. Because anywhere else in the building, the view is blocked by that 10-story apartment building to our south.
Hmm.
Yeah, I guess I'm back to the question of, would the 2-bedroom unit have better, daylighting conditions, for example, or views had it occupied the corner?
On the 2nd and 3rd floors, the 2-bedroom space is occupied on that corner.
I see.
Because we're required, we need 7 2-bedroom spaces, and 6 of them occupied are on that wing.
Right. And then part of our going back to where we were finding the bias for our organization of these spaces, since we can't have balconies on the inward-facing balconies, the courtyards being at least somewhat present for those residents who don't have the opportunity yet.
I would also ask you to think a little bit about the noise and acoustic issues for Unit 404. Because on one side of me is the elevator lobby, and the other side of me is the community room.
Mm-hmm.
You understand my point?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I would say if things are too loud, that's a unit that no one is going to want.
Yeah.
If you could push it to the outer edge again, then you only have one side of it facing a community space. I mean, adjacent or butting a community space, right?
Uh-huh.
I see.
Yes, definitely. I would, I'll defer to Professor Farlow on that.
Yep. I don't know. We can look at that. Let's let you chase it this way. I appreciate that you have a position on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if 404 is better as 2 1-bedrooms, or if it's better as a 2-bedroom where, the master is, and it looks like the master is maybe the bedroom. Yeah, on the right, closer to the elevator, and then maybe the other room is a guest room, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So that's maybe the way you might approach that, or like if you were leasing that, that's maybe how, as the sales team, you might sort of unpack that.
That's how I envisioned it in my mind. That master bedroom would be on that inside. So the major concern would be the noise from the elevator shaft.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of the size of that 2-bedroom unit, it's not a very deep unit, and the width of the living room and the width of the master bedroom are about the same, it seems to me.
Yeah.
So if you could, I don't know if it's possible to go past column line D2 to the left. I know I can see in some cases you always keep the column line as a demising wall, but in some cases you don't.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be sliding the community room down, getting that 2-bedroom unit a little larger so that maybe there's a healthier width to the living room.
Uh-huh.
Again, I'll defer to Professor Farlow.
No, I love that you're trying to line the demising walls up with column lines, but it's not a rule, and it's a rule that you were fast to break. I mean, I'm looking at
it's not
right.
consistent.
I'm looking at the units above, the one beds above.
Yeah.
The column line blasts right through the units. It happens along the X line, for example. It happens along the O4 line. So, I mean, it's in some cases, I think the column in the unit is kind of like a virtue. It could be a virtue.
Yeah. The way I organized it was based on fitting these shapes, these rectangular units, into the facade, the exterior construction with as few different versions of units as possible, if that makes sense. Because in previous iterations we had 14 different types of units, different shapes, different sizes, and that opportunity on the that south wall of that westerly wing is to divide those spaces evenly so we get a matching unit.
Right.
Can you guys so you're learning how to do this, and it's a lot of fun, and you begin to appreciate the variations, right, that this can actually produce. So can you guys maybe zoom in on like U05? Can we just look at the relationship of structure to the outside walls? Yeah. Okay. So this is something I'm a little bit concerned about. So like, and I was afraid that this is what I was going to see. So like the columns actually need to be inboard of the outside wall.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The columns cannot interrupt the outside wall. The columns can't be kind of a freestanding thing, really, like they're shown at that corner near your cursor. So the wall has to slip past the column,
mm-hmm.
right? And because it's holding up the floor plate, and the wall is definitely outboard of that. So there's got to be a couple of things that you have to sort of think about. Maybe if you cut a section through this, you'll see more clearly what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know what the solution is. I think that maybe the section would reveal the correct way to approach it, but the column line could actually be inboard of the outside wall by sliding the column lines on the outsides in,
mm-hmm.
or everything gets fatter by the thickness of that column. Dan, are you following what I'm suggesting here?
Yeah, I would just tell you, if this was 1965 to 1955, we would have seen structural expression in columns.
Like Mies van der Rohe, right? Yeah.
But at that time, no one worried about thermal breaks and energy conservation issues
mm-hmm.
that they do today. And that's why today you don't see that same level of structural expression, because columns have a tendency to be pulled back. Now, you might see it in a high rise, I'll give you that. But normally at lower level buildings, the columns are pulled inward. The outer wall slips past the column, and the column is sort of inside the space, for the reason that you want to have the continuity of insulation. You want to have a wall that has higher degrees of insulations, and you don't have the thermal break problem associated with a column.
And even in those buildings that Professor Farrow just mentioned, those columns on the outside wall, like the Seagram building, those were all ersatz, right? They were decoration, right, to sort of reference the structure that they were concealing behind. Can you guys cut a section through this, or do you guys have a section
We have
through an outside wall so we can look at a column line relative to the skin?
Did you cut one through the outside?
We've got a building section.
Yeah, that might work. There we go. And does it have the columns and column lines thawed?
So the column lines, we actually linked our structural model in, and we were having some issues with the display of the grids.
I
So I just
understand.
turned them off to make it a little bit less confusing.
Look on the left-hand side. Well, yeah. On the right side wall, they look like they're pulled back, but look at the left wall.
Yeah, the left wall, they're
Pull
showing
pull
that
up.
embedment, right? They're showing them in the
They're
wall.
right in line with the wall.
Right.
I think the easier thing for you to do, it might be to let the column lines stay where they are, but let the wall slip out past it.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a property line issue, I agree.
Right. I think we respected
we're already set back on out on the on all the property lines right now. So
right.
I'd flip it forward. Slip it out.
Yeah, I think I agree. That seems to be.
And this conversation that we're having with you two, Alec and Trevor, is something I want all of you all to audit your own sections and floor plans for. I want to be real clear that there's no columns embedded in the exterior wall construction. They are within the volume of the space itself, within the dwelling unit or within the retail unit, and that the outside wall is free and clear of that, so that and the real reason is so that we have a difference between skin and structure, but also for the basic reason that we don't have any sort of thermal conductivity issues that bring all the cold into the building.
Right.
Now, and it's not to say that you can't have some form of articulating where structure lies in the building, but like Professor Farlow said, it's really going to be a different wall trim condition on the outside.
Yeah.
So it's going to be apparently the thickness of a beam or the thickness of a column.
Right.
That represents what's behind it.
And that's the other way to do it. If you were dead set, like if you were doing a masonry building, guys, and you were dead set, or you had property line issues, and so you might do like a pier at each one of those columns, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that you expressed with the sort of a vertical element, a pier out of, like, let's say limestone or cast stone, and everything else around it was brick or glass, and that's one way of coping with that. But I don't think you're dealing with brick veneer on these skins. These walls just simply don't look that thick.
Right. They'll actually probably even get thinner too. We were our intentions to stick with the composite steel and concrete structural system with a retaining wall that's going to come in on the underground parking floor here.
Yeah.
So if anything, this is, as you say, Mark, a snapshot in time of where our structure is in comparison to the exterior walls.
Yeah, this is the week where we find this mistake every time. So you're right on time. So there's plenty of time to fix it, but it is. So you guys, this is the way it works in an office, and many of you guys know this, right? You're like, so then some bonehead boss like me comes around and says, "What the heck are you guys doing? Don't you realize that?" Blah blah blah, and you get the finger wagging, and then you got to go back and go, "Oh crap, we gotta like recalibrate the whole model to make sure that everything that's impacting this question, this issue, is resolved," and that's what you have to do, and that's what we'll do in offices, for example.
Right.
So you have to be kind of alert to that.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing I think will hold us up very much. I think that all makes sense to pull the exterior walls out just a tad. And fortunately, we gave ourselves the tolerance with our setbacks early on in the project to permit us to do so.
This section is kind of bizarre to me, though, because I'm not sure where the grade line is. Looks like the grade line is the bottom line. Is that correct?
No.
It's actually right here. That's
what I thought.
The parking.
So graphically, those things need to be tweaked too, so that they, like you saw earlier tonight, so they read as sections.
Right. With the streets added in also.
That, and show some cars driving in the lower level, show people on balconies.
And there's a slab thickness there, and there's
bingo.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Let's see.
Can we look at the elevations, or?
Yeah.
Is the stuff at the ground floor just all glass? Is that why it's open?
That's actually where the retaining wall is going to come in.
It looks like it's solid to me.
Yeah, but the ground line is really at the 0-0 line, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm almost looking like it doesn't seem that there is much glass on the ground level. Am I mistaken?
The spaces, the rectangular lines on that ground level on the upper, in the north elevation, those will be glass. I just haven't.
Those will be glass.
Yeah,
right.
but haven't been placed. And then again on the south elevation, all the glazing hasn't been completely determined. I'm basing it off of the programming, where the retail programming is complete, but the western wing of that building on Alfred Street is not completely.
I understand.
Finished.
Right. Then we have a axonometric of our structural system here, still being developed, but Professor Farrow had mentioned the advantage in making the steel encased concrete so that we can achieve the fire rating we'll need on the parking floor, but then still utilize a continuous system up through those residential floors above.
What are some of the spans in the system? Some look quite long.
These up here are 40, 46, 40, 48.
That's the longest span.
Yeah.
What is your structural system?
It would be the composite steel and concrete columns, and then
we were considering the post-tension concrete slab to work at those longer spans, but I've been struggling to find any really conclusive research about that they're spanning of capabilities. Mostly of what I've seen is just the relationship between the thickness of the slab and the span, but it was all about waffle slabs. So,
yeah, is that post-tension system then an all concrete system with columns and concrete columns and slabs? Then
you're talking about ours, or for the
one that you're considering?
For the floor plates, we were considering concrete for the floors, and then the columns on the ground and underground floors, and then the steel would be what's encased in the concrete on those lower floors would continue up so that we could have a little bit more of that space for residential programming.
I would think that a post-tension system would be a lot like precast. It's got its own set of rules, so to speak. So I would probably be as familiar as I can with that system. And I'm not sure, is it a system that's covered in the Studio Companion? It might be.
It was briefly covered. There were a few little diagrams, but I didn't. It wasn't kind of sufficient enough to really understand it, I don't think.
Well, if Professor Farlow says it's a possibility here, then I think we should.
Yeah, I mean, I think the post-tension floor deck and columns is an option. I know I referenced it, but I want to be clearer with you. A post-tension structural framing system for the residential and even for the separation between retail and first floor uses and pure residential uses above is probably all concrete, and it's all post-tension concrete. So columns and slabs are the same material because
all one trade.
Yeah, right. Because like all of the horizontal steel, like if you look at pictures on the internet of pre-pour, right, before they pour, that steel is running in willy and nilly directions, but it all converges. If you watch my gesture here on the screen, it all converges at the column.
Right.
like water down a sink drain, right? So the column and the slab are kind of this unitized condition, if you will. And so there would not be like steel punching up or rising up through all of the residential floors in a post-tension building, right? Because it's like steel columns with concrete wrapped around them. A post-tension deck is concrete with reinforcing steel on it that receives all the steel that is horizontally configured. Now, do I know what the slab spans are for post-tension concrete? I can't remember off the top of my head, but I do see some concern for the Alfred Street spans. Those look excessive, and I'm wanting to go back to maybe like a framing plan, like as a pure floor plan, perhaps, so that we can validate that. Yeah, so the difference between V and W seems pretty hefty.
Yeah, that was one of our biggest concerns structurally, or still is, but we originally had that divided into two bays at 24 feet.
Lovely. But it wreaked havoc in the basement?
It did.
Yeah. Can we go to the basement?
Yeah, so I mean, this is an older snapshot of it, but this is the basement floor. Now we have the ramp that's going to go through here.
I thought the ramp was in the middle, like between 2 and 3.
No.
It is now.
Oh, yeah.
This is a dated image or a dated drawing.
So so I can't really help you now because I don't know what you're trying to do with the parking level yet. And right now, I'd say that you got to be balls to the wall to get that resolved. And because you may need to introduce a V.5 column line or a V.3 column line that's maybe flush with the south wall of that stair.
Yeah, I'm thinking
make this work.
Yeah, I was thinking putting one at the demising wall of those rooms
of the units upstairs. But again, it sounds great, right? In concept, sounds great. Sounds like it could be workable, but I don't know exactly what the layout is. I can't remember what it looks like. So I think you ought to like get on that now, and then let's pin that up tonight or tomorrow.
Are you talking about the parking layout?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Let's pin that down now, like tonight or tomorrow, because you really can't spend any more time like massaging that.
Right. I have a question for.
I'm not freaking out, but I'm sort of freaking out, right? Because really, guys, and this is really for all of you. I said this at the beginning of the semester. I said it at the end of Benchmark 1 that there will still be some of you that are trying to work out the underground parking plan, even at Benchmark 2. But it's kind of like fine tuning it to be perfect, not like, well, we could do angle parking or we could do, perpendicular parking. What do you think? Because those are seismic differences, right? Those are seismic changes. So I think you need to resolve that quickly.
Right. I wanted to ask Professor Farrow a question. If do you have any idea how the cantilevering capabilities of that post-tension slab could be, so that if we do introduce a column or maybe slide column line V down a little bit, what we could expect to achieve on the outside of it?
Not offhand. It's not a system I'm that familiar with. What I'll try to do here in the next few minutes is send you some information that you can take a look at.
Okay.
It might help you with some decisions. I would think that small cantilevers will probably work, meaning 10 to 15% of the span without much of a problem.
Okay.
I agree.
All right. Alec, do you want to touch on the HVAC at all?
Sure. You just go into the floor. Well, I don't know if the things will cover it up. So reworked the HVAC a little bit to reflect what you had previously stated as we need a unit-based system rather than a central system, even if it's by floor. So I provided the spaces on the balconies.
Yeah, I see
for
that.
The VRF units.
Yeah, like the box. Yeah, the box just above the W.
Right.
Right.
The where it started running into issues, where it became a little weird, is on the interior, because we do not have the balconies. Those boxes kind of.
Right. And that's why I was suggesting in one of the other schemes that if you look at where your, let's say, closet is in the bedroom, and in some cases, let's say I'm looking at the bedroom in 507, right?
Zoom in on that.
Right.
Yeah.
If let's say where that box is, the closet actually was in the wall that separates the two rooms. So that it kind of was an extension of that box.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right.
It would fit cleaner in that sense, right? It's just a question of, you'd have to decide, how does that work in terms of my internal space planning? Because now that makes either the rest.
That would push the bed to the other side. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, it might. But I think you can do like onion skin layouts to show variations on that, right? I think that's another option, is to have put the box in the living room, and the kitchen, for instance, could have gone on the wall where 507 is printed, so that it becomes one continuous condition, right? Within the room.
And then you and then you could actually imagine how someone could, work around that. Maybe they'd have like built-in furniture or something in that, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what you've got is not the end of the world, because it solves it certainly for all of the street side facades, right? And it just becomes sort of problematic on the B facades or the C facades. So again, really good designers will try to work through that quickly and nimbly. But it's not, like I said, the end of the world. What I would say is maybe potentially an issue here, and that I noticed in the elevations, and it sort of relates back to HVAC, is the size of and the number of some of these windows on the non-street side facades. I feel like these units are underprivileged in their amount of glazing, particularly like in that 507 unit, where it's only one window in that bedroom, and it's a small, narrow one.
The other point I would make about the location of that unitized package unit, if you were to put it in the wall that divides, let's say, the living room from the bedroom, then you have to think that you might be able to consolidate your ductwork.
Yeah.
Because on one side you'd feed the bedroom, and the other side you'd feed the living room, right?
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I'm getting at? And that might be a more strategic location.
Let's see.
Yeah. Definitely.
Then actually you could split the thickness of that between the two rooms too.
Right.
And that means it's less intrusion on one space.
Right.
And it becomes I don't know, maybe it becomes a built-in bookcase or something on one end, right?
But these are nice, simple units. I definitely appreciate that. And can we go back up to the 2-bedroom at the Notch on Alfred, or the 1-bedroom? Maybe it was another level. I'm trying to remember. Maybe it was the 2-bedroom on the corner at 04. Yeah, the dark blue one.
Or
the dark blue one.
Here.
400?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that one. Zoom in on that little closet. That's the bathroom there. What is that room behind the bed?
There was a that what is marker that would be the restroom.
That's the bathroom. Right?
And then the room that his cursor is on now is a walk-in closet.
So, like, getting back to window sizes, I feel like some of these windows can be bigger, but of course that's that's something that you have to validate on the elevations. That's one thing. But then also when you go through the meticulous sort of move of the columns so they're not in the wall, but inside of the space itself, that door into that bathroom has to like slide closer to the bed, and then you start saying, then a developer is going to start saying, do we need doors in all of these spaces? Do we need a door in the closet, for example? Those, like that door times the 4 floors is 4 doors, and then there's probably like 12 rooms on each. You know what I'm saying? That's the way they start thinking. How can we save more money? So maybe there are some rooms, right, that you can get away with not having a door, because it's always going to be open. And I think like closets are those kinds of rooms. And where you've got that closet door now, you know, there's no room for casing on the hinges. There's no room for casing on the passage set. So then you say, well, maybe there's no door there. Maybe there's maybe there's a mirror, right, and a built-in where the cursor is, so that when I'm standing there knotting the tie just before I leave in the morning, that's where I do that. And then you know what I mean? So that there's always you're always making the most out of the very little footprint that you're given. So thinking about reducing doors, because you don't necessarily need them, as maybe a way to make these rooms seem a little bit bigger and a little bit more graceful.
Right.
But you're going to have a graceful problem, if you will, at that column location for the. And if you're going to do post-tension slabs, guys, then you're not going to show like steel wide flange columns. You're going to have an 18-inch diameter concrete thing.
Yeah.
And then suddenly
it takes up a lot more space.
Yeah. Suddenly the bed is kind of like
pushed in, and
yeah, you know what I mean? And so then you say, how can I make the most of this? Right. The units are pretty close. The facades, I think, are getting closer, but I think you need to privilege more openings and larger ones. I like the proportion of them, but I feel like in order to get like nice daylighting, nice fresh air, and nice units out of these, you need to look at that again. Can we go to the ground floor? Walk me through this, because I think I had some issues with the ground floor before.
The issues you mentioned previously.
Storage?
What's that? Pardon?
You had storage, I think, between V and W and 1 and 3.
Yes, that's correct. So previously it was on that facade, the Alfred facade. And actually he does. That's not the most recent. Let me.
Yeah, this looks like the same.
Previously, it had the storage along that wall.
Right.
But I've moved it back. Let me share my screen.
So what happens on the V, column V? What happens on that wall? What's there where your cursor
That's
is?
where I'm unsure, because we can fit in all the storage behind it. Let me share my, if I share my screen, you can see.
Okay, let me go to you.
So here, this is 30 storage units, and if they're if they're stacked, we can get 60 in this space. So the storage can get even smaller. This is the denotation for bicycle storage along this wall, and then we have a lot more a lot of space here that can be used for various programs that.
Well, do you have like leasing office, conference room or business center?
Conference room over here in the lobby, an office right here, the front desk. This is the mail room with we're going to be putting mail in the wall, through the wall. Dog wash closer to the exit, then a changing room here for the bicyclists. and then the retail in the corner.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this space here becomes
it's an opportunity for you. Well, think about what you'd like to see there. You know, maybe that ground floor can retract a little bit. Maybe it can come in a little bit, so it's not so generous. Maybe you can offer up, you know, maybe bike storage is in that room and the bikes are on the facade. That might be an interesting thing. Maybe there's a bike rental shop there, for example. Kind of a quasi retail space. I could be persuaded to look at that as a program. But again, thinking hard about, like you did relative to the laundry and the exercise rooms upstairs, thinking harder about how these programs can activate the street and be, you know, a thing that promotes this building, its occupants, and the agenda of the building a little bit more clearly is maybe the way to answer that question of what's this going to be.
Right. To me, it would make sense to have something that it would be a community space. It would be like, I was thinking a restaurant or a kitchen with a cafe for the residents. So it gets that a sort of an advertisement as you're walking down Alfred.
It might also help to know a little bit more about these rooms in terms of, you know, how they're working. I mean, I'm looking at doors to give me some sense of scale in these spaces, but like how many people can go in that office, how many desks, how many chairs, how many conference tables, or how many conference chairs can sit at the conference table. And if I knew that, or like the dog storage, I mean, dog cleaning, how many dogs can you wash at a time, and that kind of thing. It would be helpful if you all brought up your plans to show the sort of finer grain of the program, so that we could make sure that you're on track. But a business center might be useful, where you can go in, you know, maybe it's a place where there's a fireplace, maybe it's where there's computers, maybe there's a coffee bar, maybe there's a small kitchenette in it, so that, you know, it's the living room that some of these smaller units that you're proposing don't really have, and homeowners like me would come down to and use to watch the golf match on Saturday afternoon, or to play bridge or whatever old people do, right, when they play cards, right? So that's kind of the alternate living room. And that could give rise to like a different kind of expression on the facade. Maybe it's, you know, overhead sectional doors that can open up, or maybe it's a different kind of large glass openings with glass doors in it, so that it really connects to the street. And since that whole thing is set back 8 feet anyways, maybe there's some outdoor areas that can be grabbed and and then integrated into that program. So thinking, you guys, about the ground floor in terms of the experience of the building and how it promotes this agenda is really an important thing. But I would say that an additional V.4, V.3 column line is not going to impact your units or the ground floor very much. I think the proof is in the pudding of the lower level. And if you can make it work there, it works upstairs.
Right.
But I think that span is just too grand. It's too much. But you can validate that. Can we go, before you sort of close out, whether it's yours, Alex, or Trevor, the model, can we look at this and orbit around and see it
I can
from above? I know Professor Farrow had some questions about like the 1W column line and what was happening in those units on the Alfred leg from the south side.
1W.
Yeah, right there. Can you orbit around and let?
Okay, these would be.
Yeah, I see. So does the roof of that unit on 4 Does it actually extend out and create kind of a
So this space here is actually that community space, and then there's the unit starts past this column line right here.
but doesn't the community space want to end at that wall, that corner?
Yeah.
Okay. And can you show us the hard corner on the intersection of the streets? There was something unusual happening there.
Again, some of these columns would be removed, some of the structure.
Yeah.
They'd be cantilevered. But this is that public exterior space that prioritizes the Ransom Gillis house.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And the windows you're showing on the ground floor, are those retail windows?
Yes.
So I think those go all the way to grade. I mean, I think that's how I would look at that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do those huge pony walls, the walls between the grade and the sill line. I would extend those all the way down.
Okay. Like the corner is.
Yeah, yeah. Because see, a developer will want to be able to say to a tenant between when one lease ends and one begins, they're going to want to be able to say, look, you can put the door anywhere in this wall, right? You don't have to cut any wall mass out in order to do it, or you don't have to leave the door where it is. So a large opening that goes from the head height down to grade allows that kind of current and future flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
So I would think of it in those terms, not just you guys, but everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the same goes for the whole exterior storefront system.
Yeah.
Because tenants might want to occupy a different percentage of that space. And so you want them to be able to sort of decide, how much space do they want?
Mm-hmm.
And when you have different tenants moving in, they want the similar expression on the outside, right?
Yep. And then what were you guys thinking of for the skin?
So we had in our lab module, we specified a insulated metal panel as sort of a unitized system. And then our glazing, we were looking into what we could get the highest R value out of. So I think a lot of those most economical options were that double glazing with the argon encased. So
low E.
Yeah.
Emissivity. So what the metal panel, what is there a spec that you're looking at? Is there a company?
Yes, it's in the lab. Let's see if I can jump over real quick.
And can it come in different colors and different textures and different finishes? Because it's reading, guys, as kind of and I like simplicity, but it's reading as one thing. I just want to make sure.
Our idea was to use the metal panels because they have some variants. We can change the color and texture to emphasize different portions of the building.
Gotcha.
So we can, from the exterior, you can differentiate between program of, for example, the retail for the community space and the units.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know this line, Metal Span Architectural Insulated Metal Panels. I don't know this company. Where are they from?
That's a good question. Where they're from, I didn't. I looked more into the product data and seeing what we could get for the panel sizes, but I can look it up for you.
I would try to, if they're not from the U.S. And not because I'm promoting some nationalistic sensibility, but like for lead points and for a more sustainable and affordable, less exotic strategy. And since metal panels are certainly local, can be local, and even our good friends in Canada have some wonderful metal panel products. Riverside Group in Windsor, for example, Erie products have things there. These are somewhat local, so double check that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if you can like within one material choice, you can provide variety. But my advice is to kind of be calm, right? Like do things that are subtle, like change direction of ribs or joints. Or if you're going to do all warm gray, maybe some of them have no texture, some of them do. And so, because you can compose, you know, a beautiful sonnet or symphony out of just a couple few notes. And that's something that you want to start getting into. But I think the column issue you need to solve really quickly, because it's going to impact your ability to pull together the wall section, which is a high stake component of next week's grades. Okay.
Right. I think it's also possibly useful to start doing a blow-up study of the elevation.
Yeah.
And I think that if you look in the lab module 3 that I just sent you, sort of the last page of it that's talking about the building assemblies and components, you see sort of a enlarged elevation that shows a wall section cut and then a plan section cut. And that's the kind of drawing that might get to some of the issues Professor Farlow's talking about.
Yeah.
Making decisions about the nature of the panel assembly, finish, color, texture.
And you don't necessarily have to solve it for the whole building, but you can solve it for that moment, right? For that
that's
one large
representative study for what the building as a whole might be like.
And I think if I recall, Nathaniel and Jess had a section and an enlarged elevation married on one plate, and maybe Richard and Cody did as well. So
yeah,
it's a great way to approach it.
One of them.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, we could definitely look into it.
Okay. Anything else?
No, I think that does it for us tonight.
Cool.
So the email I just sent Trevor and Alec, take a look at the last email I just sent you. There's a booklet about post-tension concrete, and I think it's pretty comprehensive. It explains the pros and cons, says what sort of buildings would use it and which ones wouldn't, and also shows you figures and representation of how the systems are configured in plan and section, and has some sizing charts.
Okay, thank you.
Great. All right, so let me ask that we take about a 5-minute break, and then we can go on to the next group. All right. Thanks. We'll get to Jess and Nathan in a few moments. Thank you. Okay, I'm back.
All right. I think Jess was going to join us.
Jess, are you there? Yep, he's there.
Okay.
Okay, who wants to control the slide deck?
I can start.
Okay.
I'm going to share screen something really fast.
Jess, are you in the nor'easter, or did you all miss that?
Oh, I missed it. Thank God. I'm tired of snow. Yeah, I want spring. All right, I'm going to screen share. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
No. So we kind of wanted to use today, Nathan and I spoke yesterday, and we just wanted to use today to kind of like go over maybe new things that we haven't showed, new things that we can gain feedback on instead of like kind of showing anything repetitive for next week. So one of the things that I spent time working on the weekend on the break as well was correcting more of the elevations, and previously we've always kind of showed like a hard surface for our elevations. So I've started kind of adding more of a shape and geometry to the elevation. So this is if you're looking right now, it's the elevation of John R. Street. And the shape of this elevation, the geometry is becoming to be more like our concept. So this is one, and this is like a sort of a rendering from Revit that we. So it kind of
back to the facade.
Yeah, and then we haven't applied any materials to this. Maybe that could be done in the in a large elevation.
Can you zoom in on this?
I can try.
No, the flat.
So this is like the really front part of the elevation, and this is the back building. We'll just like offset it by a couple of feet. I guess like if you see my cursor, this right here, it's like the flush with this big elevation, and this here in the back is flush back.
It's set back. Yeah, I remember. Because that's the gap, right?
Correct.
Yeah, you guys are the Mind the Gap group. Can you show us some 3D views now?
Yeah. So this is that same view of the elevation from the street. You see the actual shape, the geometry is like kind of like a razor in a sense. Sharp edges. This is from the other view where we were talking about with the building offset. I think we have to work out how the courtyard is entering from this point. Maybe, I don't know, I was thinking maybe we can get rid of one portion of the second floor from the, so like this piece right here, so that it opens up more to the courtyard.
Yeah, but those are units, right?
Yeah, maybe that could be just added to the top.
Can you go back to the elevation?
And
go back to that view.
Yeah. I'm still working on the. So this is a kind of X I'm playing around with how. Hopefully, I can present to you a more detailed diagram of how the facade is working and how it works.
What is the skin again? Can you remind me?
The exterior along John R. and Alfred is the hardy plank, and then the interior, the courtyard portion, is the cedar or natural wood.
So the hardy plank is usually a plank, right? It's a 1x4 sort of proportion. Or are you using this as sheets? What are you all thinking?
We would probably use it in a vertical application. So we
Yeah.
make kind of
So
a
you can get those
type of-
facets then. So
Yeah.
okay, so but you can't get it to run 4 stories in length, so there's going to be horizontal joints.
There'll be breaks along the line, and that's kind of why the facade starts to break apart, so that we can start to control.
Are you concerned about the butt joint of when one vertical plank meets another, and what happens at that as at a moment relative to like moisture sitting there, moisture getting driven in at that joint? Do you see it as different than, say, a horizontal joint?
Can I ask, are also, it looks like there's some very large panels there. Does Hardie make something that's like a 4x8 sheet or a large
That's
sheet?
another question. I'm trying to simplify this even more.
Yeah,
Because-
once the actual material starts to show up, you'll start to see those vertical pieces stacked together.
Okay.
So what you're seeing right now are large plates are actually just material.
Right. And I don't think there's anything wrong with them. I mean, it might actually be an approach to take, but I think if you're thinking about a large panel system, you might want to look at maybe a cement board or something that's going to come in a large panel, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because you'll have some
and actually, it could have a textured or a vertical pattern on
Correct.
it to achieve
It could
right
be textured
the sort of general aesthetic that you're going for. So the
I would say
faceted idea is
one other
really
suggestion on the interior side. You mentioned cedar.
Mm-hmm.
There's another product. I think it's called Acoya wood, ACOYA. You might want to look at that as an alternative. I think it's going to hold up very well without staining and treatment. And it might be another alternative to cedar, which is probably going to require staining and treatment.
Yeah,
otherwise it goes gray.
Right.
That was I was trying to, in the materials portion of module 2, look into anti-aging woods or some kind of anti-fungal
Yeah, this
wood.
is like a composite type system, but it looks unbelievably like wood. I mean, it's not like these sort of Trex type products.
Okay.
Can we go back to the axonometric?
Yeah.
So the stuff that's extruded out, Jess, the darker gray, that's the Hardie plank
panel.
Period. That's the panel or planks.
And this is like a whole, I guess, like a prefab element. There could be it's probably like a layer on that. It's got skin, but I'm taking the whole wall off in this diagram.
I know.
Yeah. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking.
Well, I'm just asking what that material is, just to be sure.
Yeah, I think right now we're not showing any material just because we're mainly showing like the form, what's becoming of our facade now. But we're going to show that in most of these drawings.
I love this drawing.
Yeah, I think it's great, and I like I mean, personally, I have one quick question. Are there actually like a row house condition nearby in this area?
Yeah, it's all like that.
And that's the reason I asked that, because when you showed me that perspective view a moment ago,
yeah,
the first thought I had is it has the verticality that reminds me of a row house condition.
Right.
And I thought if that exists, that would be an interesting correlation.
Well, then when you look at this thing flat on, like an orthogonal projection, like the elevation, it's so interesting, right? Because this elevation doesn't achieve
Not at all.
the textural like wonder, right? That the axonometric does, or that the 3D perspectives do. So this is a telling point.
Yeah, this elevation is ongoing.
No, but I mean, there's still enough there to understand the massing, and yet you still don't get all of it. That's the beauty of drawings. They can go a long way to say things or describe things, but they can't tell you everything. This is a good learning point.
Can you show me that 3D perspective that shows that sort of acute corner, the other side? So just one observation. You might want to think about the variation in the columns and the bracket sizes.
Okay.
See how you sort of have the one central column and then the two other arms are smaller?
Mm-hmm.
You might want to think whether or not they want to be more similar in size if possible. Normally when I've seen these conditions before, there's a greater sort of equality in dimension and mass.
I see that. Yeah.
Rather than you have sort of like the parent column and then the two little, brackets, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you might want to think about that. The other question I have, Professor Farlow, part of me almost wants to see maybe a balcony cut into that acute corner or something that you could go out into that space.
Yeah, I think we had. Can we go to the plans? I think we had some opportunity to.
I don't have the plan on this PDF. I mean, you can bring it up.
I printed.
Didn't we talk about that before though, Jess and Nathan?
Yeah, can I share my screen real quick?
Yeah,
Jeff?
I'll go to you.
Okay. All right,
Nathan, Tracy, my wife came in fourth in her age group, so she's delighted.
Tell her I say congratulations.
The recent run, yeah.
Never ever gotten fourth in my life. So here,
I'm not going to say there were only 5 running because she'd kill me and I'd be sleeping in the garage tonight. But there were a lot of people, and so she's pretty excited. Go ahead.
So this is that second floor corner condition. Here's that 3-season room we were talking about.
Yeah, but I think we're talking about like the 1-bedroom on the corner, right, Dan?
Yeah, they're just though. I sorry, the perspective view suggests that that's not a 90-degree corner to me. It looks like it's 90 degrees here, but it looks much more acute in that perspective.
Yeah, that's definitely maybe some license.
I think it's a perspective issue.
Yeah, those Revit perspectives are pretty harsh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I can give it back to you, Jess.
Okay.
And that's what I guess Professor Farlow's suggesting. Maybe, as I understand it, there was a possibility of developing that as sort of like a walkout balcony. Is that right?
Well, I mean, I think we talked about that before, but I'm looking at a closet there, and I'm looking at a bedroom. The bedroom is the only room, but the bed is against the wall. It might be worth looking at. It might be worth looking at rearranging that bedroom to. Allow a sliding door or a French door to go out onto a private bedroom balcony facing south.
Mm-hmm.
It would be neat to see people on that wall occasionally, like in the morning.
Okay. And I'm also thinking about the notion of that as, again, as Professor Farlow said, taking advantage of those unique conditions to create a condition that people would say, I really like this aspect of this apartment. I can't find this anywhere else, right?
Right, and that's why I want to live there.
I have to have it, right? Yeah. I have to live there. I would say that one of the things I learned over time is that emotion can be very powerful when it comes to environments, particularly residential. People at the higher end, they become more attached to emotional conditions like that.
And they're therefore willing to pay for it.
Right, they can afford to pay for it.
What are the 2 triangles in the top of the image? I saw them on the elevation, Jess.
These right here?
Yeah.
Oh, those are solar panels that we're incorporating into our model.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Do you have another view like the Alfred Street view?
I have this one, but this one's ongoing. I need to add more color and walls, everything, but even like this elevation, I'm trying to incorporate what's surrounding the context. I know that I think it's called the Robeson House.
Yep.
Yeah, the one. So I'm trying to just incorporate more story to this elevation.
So this has a little bit more work. Oh, this is interesting.
So this is a change that we've gotten to the courtyard. On your right, you kind of see like a process of like the terracing. So now what's going on is there's stairs for each terrace, and then this could be seen kind of a little bit in the section. So you're going from the 5th floor all the way to the 2nd. I'm still missing a stair to ground to level.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking maybe like, do I want to close off this corner? It's just something that I'm considering from the last review with the security purposes.
Mm-hmm.
So now the terraces on the courtyard are stepping down, and it also, this is designed so that like anyone can go from the 5th to the 2nd, and maybe there's some kind of interesting spaces going on those terraces. Maybe like one terrace is for relaxing, and we have a relaxation room on the second floor. So this is ongoing. Hopefully.
Can we go back to the 3D view?
Yeah.
Can you zoom in on that? Yeah, where the cursor is. Yeah.
And then the facade of the courtyard terrace, I've been also working on adding some louvers onto the windows because of the sun exposure.
Uh-huh.
And you can also.
This is not a very sort of well thought out thought, but I feel like, and since you're potentially open to this critique or this feedback about that stair, and I'm hearing that it's not thought out yet or it's not completely resolved yet, but I do feel a sense that the stair and the armature that's holding it up, well, I feel like you think you need some sort of armature to hold the stair up, and I'm not sure that I'm convinced that needs to be the case, for one thing. For another, it feels like it's getting heavier and clunkier, and the ability to see through the entire development is getting more eclipsed, getting more difficult.
I feel the same way. Yeah.
And so if you're feeling that way, maybe try to act on that instinct and let this comment sort of help you or guide you. But
yeah,
I just feel like it's almost like there's a couple of languages colliding here. There's something about the language of Brush and Alfred that's turning the corner pretty deftly here in the left, but then that language starts to change as it gets to be more courtyard. I think the material's changing, so maybe it needs to change. But then it gets into this sort of different sort of reticulated grid, this more opaque thing that's altogether different a language than everything else around it. And I just want to, if that's what you're intending, I want you to be clear about that intention, or clearer about it.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a change that I worked on the weekend, and this is the result. This is where I am right now, so that's why I didn't have any drawings, because I didn't want to waste time trying to make drawings for this, or like. Mm-hmm. But I feel the same way, and maybe I was thinking flipping the stairs so that it still has it still opens up to the courtyard, because it does eat up a little on this one. And then whatever you're seeing on the stairs, like this grid, like lattice, that's supposed to be like the green wall.
So that's softer and could be maybe a little bit more translucent, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could just be like 2x2 steel tube, tube steel, right? To create that like a welded grid that you could actually see through it in the winter, but maybe in the summer it gets a little thicker and a little bit more vegetated. Yeah, so that's maybe an option. But it's reading like scored block right now, if you know what I mean.
Okay. I'm also wondering why there's no glass to the right-hand side where it looks like it's all brick.
That's
a space that doesn't need glass.
Behind that is I believe one of the mechanical rooms.
Can we go to that plan real quick? Because I think we obviated some chances to provide some glass in those rooms.
Pull it up again if you want.
Nate has that, I think.
Yeah, that'll be.
Didn't we talk about that?
So we talked about including
there it is.
Glass along this wall, along here for security.
Yeah, to keep some eyes on it.
Yeah,
you're just not indicating. So you've changed this a little bit since the last time, maybe since the review, but okay.
Yeah, I mean,
there might be some opportunity for windows, like in the electrical room on that wall that you've got your cursor on. There's maybe an opportunity for like a slit window, just to let light leak out of it at night, or to bring daylight into it, just so that it's not, but not a large window, because that kills the sort of utility and usability of that room. Because walls are sacred in these mechanical and these electrical rooms, because they're hanging things on them. They're hanging panels, or they're running conduit up to them, and so those walls are really precious. So if there's any windows in them, maybe they're just like vertical slits near the intersection of one wall running north and another running, say, east. Or maybe there's a door with glass in it, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The electrical room probably needs a second. Oh, you've got it. You've got a
Yeah.
second means of egress there. Thank you. Make sure that where that wall is on that column line, that you have the head clearance as we're dropping, as we're slipping underneath it. It looks pretty cozy. Now, me personally, I'd never have a problem walking under that, but I'm going to make sure you get the vertical height when a car is making its way down that ramp. It looked a little snug.
Yeah, it did. Did you have more, Jess?
That was actually the last one.
Okay.
Okay. I've also got some HVAC stuff. Do we want to kind of work on the structural or have a conversation about structural before
You're leading the conversation, so you brought it up, so let's start with the HVAC.
All right. Let me share my screen again. So last we talked, I was showing a...
you haven't shared it yet.
I know.
You're leading up to it.
PNG, so it's not going to show itself as a... It's not letting me share it. I'm going to export it real quick. But last we had talked, we had the hydronic system trying to bring that warm air into our floor, which would then radiate.
Right, I remember.
A comfortable floor. I've looked more into it on how we can go about using solar panel energy, since geothermal is no longer an option. How we can contain some of the water, and then also how each floor would work. There was conversation about trying to have one distribution system on each floor, and instead of the way the hydronic system works is that you'd have different zones to warm different rooms, so you could control that. Where in reality, on our floor plate, you could probably have that for the entire floor plan. So each unit has its own temperature system that would just tie back to a central location. So we would have a large mechanical room that could have a series of heat, water tanks for domestic hot water. So can you see my screen?
Yep, sure.
Okay. So we have solar collectors up above. I think right now we have about 4,000 square feet of solar collectors, which seems a bit excessive. I just wanted to fill it up all the way, and then we can start taking away as we introduce rooftop units and other elements. But I thought this diagram really helped explain how the system works. So the solar thermal collectors heat up that water. They go to this centralized per floor heating tank.
Well, that's not any different than like a hot water heater, right?
Yeah, this one's an 80 gallon. So this is showing more of a domestic, but if we can somehow create a series of those, depending on how many units are per floor, or we could centralize it in the room itself. We do have a closet that each floor plan or each unit has. So I could separate it per unit versus centralized on the floor plan. I'm kind of getting my grasps on how this technology all works. So that water system, on the lower level, I have a large thermal storage right under the ramp. So I'm trying to use up some of the dead space or unexcavated space that we have, just to have a containment area. And then as we need it and reserved, it can pump back into our solar or into our radiant floor heating or cooling, depending on the season. And then to answer the question about fresh air, condenser units I've started to identify locations on condenser units. So I'm going to switch PDFs to show you. Can you see my screen again?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So on the upper levels, I've kind of started to identify the location of where condenser units could be located to bring in that fresh air, which I found almost every simple small time condenser unit provides about 18,000 BTU, which would be more than adequate
Yeah.
for an entire unit. I think that's just shy of 1,000 square feet, and our biggest unit's 966 square feet. So that would help bring some of that fresh air in. And then to work in our amenity spaces, our normal spaces, what I've tried to do is create kind of a central location, more of like a high efficiency vertical stack, or some way to get centralized air from our mechanical room, and then start to distribute that through our first floor, and then have a secondary that pumps into our upper floors through that mechanical room. So the red line represents one zone, the orange line represents the retail 1, and the blue line represents retail 2.
I see.
And then these shades of purple represent an entire zone, and then so forth for these two. And then the green line then ties in to provide fresh air and air within each floor plan along the corridor space.
For the common area space.
For the common, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So just to back up for a minute, I think I just want to make sure we clarify what's a common building system and what's a unit system. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at option 5 of the various options that I gave you,
mm-hmm.
And as a side note, I'm still seeing students not basically follow the systems we recommended. You guys are still kind of jumping around at different things. I would suggest you don't make it difficult on everyone, and you just take a look at what was given to you and say, decide what you're using and use it. Because it will not make things better this semester. It'll just create more work all around. So option 5 basically has the Daikin system, the Altherma product, right? It's a heat pump.
Right.
And that works
Mm-hmm.
with the hydronic system you're describing, okay?
Okay.
So my suggestion is that's what's going to carry your unit, all right? It has your fresh air, and because it's a heat pump system, it can handle heating and cooling, all right? So that's your package unit for the floor of the apartments themselves. That's your unitized package system. So everything that you're describing to me right now, I would say that would probably be, and maybe I misunderstand it, but that would be just for the common spaces, right? So it's corridors, community rooms, what else?
First floor stuff.
First floor stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that said, I'm going to be honest with you, when I look at the configuration of a typical apartment level, there's just so little floor space that's allocated to corridors. Do you see what I'm saying?
It's so lean.
Yeah, I'm almost wondering, does it make any sense to consider hydronic in that condition at all? And also, as you see, 90% of the corridor basically is an inboard condition with no windows on it.
Yeah.
And completely surrounded by conditioned space, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my point is the thermal loss in the corridors, I'm going to say, is minimal.
No, that'd be great to be able to just have one system on the
Well,
upper
no,
levels.
what I'm getting at, though, is you do need to have something feeding the corridor, right? So what I'm saying is, even if you use a Daikin type system, which basically is a air heat exchanger, I mean, you can still have units that are basically suspended from the ceiling, okay? That would feed that space. And I think that would be your heating and cooling. And I just don't think that, given the unique configuration of the floor plate with so little space allocated to corridor, that burying a hydronic is just not worth it. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So use the Daikin type system, the Altherma system, for your units, and then just switch to more of a conventional system that uses a heat pump that's going to feed, let's say, refrigerant into an emitter, and that's just going to feed the corridors, okay?
Okay.
With a central DOAS, and that brings in your fresh air and exhausts, all right? And that'll also feed spaces like a small laundry or something like that. Or,
okay.
Right? Now that said, go to your main lower level, the ground floor.
Yeah.
Now you've got a more substantial floor area there, right? I mean, possibly you could go back to a hydronic there, but, you know, again, I'm starting to wonder whether or not you want to start mixing that system again. or you just keep it simple and just work with, again, a heat pump system that just feeds, let's say, refrigerant or fluid. And you
I'd love to be able to keep the
emitters in the
solar
floor.
array up there. I'd love to keep that photovoltaic array up there. What could we use that for?
Well, the array that he has, now let me back up for that. The only comment I would have about that array idea is I'm not sure you're going to get enough heat from that to actually support the conditioning of the units in terms of space heating through hydronics. I think you're going to probably be able to use it more effectively for domestic hand washing water. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Because you have a fairly cloudy sky condition here in Detroit. You understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
You're not going to have a high level of radiant energy production. I think if you were to say, look, I'm going to use that, through the heat exchanger, like you're showing us in that one diagram, a way of preheating hand washing water, right, before it has to go into something like, I don't know, an on-demand hot water heater, right? I think you'll get some energy out of that system to do that, and I think that's all I would try to accomplish with it at this point. I don't think I would try to condition floor spaces at all.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you see the solar panels? Not foolish, but kind of overdone in that case. Detroit's not ideal for solar.
I think they can work. They're probably going to be more effective if they're like a evacuated tube system.
Yeah.
Because they have the ability to pull more temperature conditioning out of overcast skies.
Okay.
That said, the downside of the evacuated tube is because it's such a thin film of water, it doesn't have a lot of heat potential overall. Yeah. But I think you could put it to work for doing some of the, as I said, supplementing hand washing water. Probably would work well in the summer, right? That said, I think because you've got electrical demand in the building, PV array would also make sense because you can.
That to me, it seems the more logical way to use the roof for me, Nathan and Jess, is that it can help run the power requirements for, say, some of the common area spaces throughout the building
and the apartments, your lightings, your plug loads.
Yeah, and possibly the apartments.
Okay.
I mean, like for this demographic, that might be a really good hook. That might be a really good sales. Like this is virtually off the grid.
Yeah.
For me, the electrical is the hook for the roof, right?
I'm going to be a bit skeptical about being off the grid because I know it's hard to do. So
I'm sure it is, especially here.
Yeah. But I think, you could make a statement, if at some point you're able to say, oh, well, 10% or 15% of the electrical energy is coming from the solar power, that might be an attraction.
Okay. Great.
So the answer is no, the roof needs all that space to hold all that stuff. You just need to do it for both water and electricity.
So, I think in your case, you had like rooftop gardens, right?
We have terrace gardens, so all the other floors have garden space. The rooftop is left unmolested, so to speak.
Okay. Well, my point would be you could create, almost like a raised platform area with panels up above it, and then if someone was gardening, then they would be underneath it. Water could be collecting on the panels and dripping down into the garden area or something. Right.
Yeah, we had talked about that, and I was looking into it, trying to figure out how to go about that with the structural, with the height restrictions that we might have. Is that considered an occupiable space if it's?
No, I don't believe it is. It's an open air space.
Yeah, which space now?
The roof.
And you're asking what about it?
Using it as more of a garden space, like a complete garden space, but with the solar panels raised, they'll catch any of that water and then self-water.
I see.
The plants under shade. So you could have, I don't remember what they're shade plants or whatever the term is. So they can grow in indirect light, but also be be able to use some of the water that's collected from those solar panels.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be a really unique space since you've essentially created a whole series of sheds.
Cool. Yeah, I don't think it's a problem.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's going to really count as height.
Okay.
Because it's not really physically, it's not a physical enclosure. It's kind of like a roof canopy, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I started looking into the occupancy, just trying to figure out, what spaces we run into. But when Jess introduced those stairs, it kind of solved any of the concerns I had with those terraces. So we'll have a whole diagram for both the life safety and ADA when it comes to that.
Good.
Next week. I think that's all we have right now.
Cool. All right. Dan, do you have anything else for them?
No, I thought there were maybe some structural issues. Are there some questions?
Oh, yeah. You said HVAC and structural. Did you want to go into that? Are you guys okay?
I'm good on HVAC.
Jess, did you have something on structure that you want to go over?
I think I'm okay for now.
All right.
I'll review structural stuff.
So what I want to make sure, okay, so thank you. So what I want to say to you guys and to everyone is that, like, from this moment forward, in the class, really, from the benchmark 1 through benchmark 3, you really need to visit with Professor Farrow by appointment, right? So that he is seeing the HVAC strategy, so he's seeing the structural strategy, so that he is seeing the building enclosure strategy as it relates not only to material that has appreciable U values or R values with a good U factor overall, but that it's tied back to the structure, right? So that there's connectivity, that there's integration of all of this. Make sure that you visit with him for the remainder of the semester. Make sure that you spend some face-to-face time with him, either in person and on campus by appointment, or in a separate hangout. You need to rely on his expertise to move your work and to advance your work forward for the remainder of the semester. That's one thing. The second thing is, like I said earlier, and Dan, you weren't here just yet when I said this, but Jason, our newest faculty member, will be joining us on Thursday night, Dan, for the Thursday night reviews next week. And then Betsy Williams, who's Peter Osler's wife, will be joining us for the reviews on Tuesday night. So we have guest critics for both nights, and so the reviews next week should be really good. I will, just to make it clear, I will be on campus for those reviews, and we'll find a space somewhere by hook or crook to run those. So if you're in the vicinity, I'd love to have you on campus to process them. Hung, I'd love to have the chance to meet you. So I hope if you're in the area, that on one of those nights we can rendezvous and meet in person. I will take any questions that you might have. Otherwise, we're done for the evening.
Okay. I did send out the next lab module. Did people have a chance to open that up?
Any questions? What Dan sent?
I didn't see that come in. I saw the Lumion 8.3 software update, but I haven't done anything since then.
All right, maybe I'm mistaken. Did anybody receive the module lab 3 from me yet?
No.
Yes, yes, it's in that email. It's in that email that you sent. If you look on Mark Farlow, it says Comprehensive Design Module 2. On the side, it says View, and that's how I was able to view it.
Okay, I'll resend it again tonight. It should be dated 3/3/2018. The title should be Module 3 Lab Assignment. but if you don't recall getting it, I'll send it out today. Please make note there is a distinction between the graduate students and undergraduate students. So there is an additional requirement for those that were 5,000 level students.
It's a big document, by the way.
Yeah, I will resend it today if you don't remember seeing it.
Good.
And we can pick up on answer questions on that and take a look at that more on Thursday. Is that okay?
Super.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Good to see you all, and onward. Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.